Our commentator today is Sukjae Lee from Seoul National University.
Given the theme of this conference and the influence of Malebranche's work on this aspect of Leibniz's corpus, it seems difficult to imagine a topic more opportune than the one that Nick's paper is addressing today. And I'm in the philosophically fortuitous position of agreeing with much of what a respected colleague from whom I've learned a great deal has to argue for, but quite a commentator, it's somewhat unfortunate since commentators have an easier time when they can play a stronger offense. I, in my own way, will try to emulate the Leibnizian harmony here and attempt to maximally satisfy both constraints of agreement and critique. As a result, my commentary will be more complimentary than critical, I think, though I will sprinkle in some questions that might provide food for further thought and discussion. As I take it, Jolley is defending three theses in his paper, which are as follows. One, statements of the two philosophers about the closeness of their relationship in Theodicy should not be taken at face value. Two, because of the differences in their attitudes to the fall, Theodicy in the narrow sense presents itself as a philosophical problem to Leibniz in a way that it does not to Malebranche. Three, Leibniz's conception or concept of reflection seems to play a key role in his defense of the Augustinian principle that under a just God, no innocent creature is wretched. As for the first thesis, I think I'm in straight agreement with the later Jolley, not the earlier. The evidence provided makes a clear case that to view Leibniz's Theodicy as a mere variation on a Malebranchian theme is not only problematically coarse, but significantly misleading as well. My attitude toward the second thesis is slightly more ambivalent. The ambivalence arises from how we are to understand Nick's conception of a theodicy in the narrow sense. Nick writes, quote, in the narrower sense, a theodicy is the project of vindicating God's justice in his treatment of individual human beings. Explaining that Judas is damned because he has made a free choice in betraying Christ is at least a contribution to theodicy in this sense, end quote. If we restrict the issue of vindicating God's justice in his treatment of individual human beings to the problem surrounding the question of whether God's justice can be maintained given the suffering and misery of the innocent, then there is indeed a clear sense in which this conception of the narrower theodicy does not emerge as a problem for Malebranche. For as Jolley, along as others such as Don Rutherford have shown, Malebranche holds that no human being is innocent given the corruption of human nature by original sin. But if no human being is innocent, then no misery or suffering of any human can be a threat to divine justice. And in contrast, for Leibniz, who does not take as strong a position on the effects of the fall on human nature, the prospect of those who are innocent and suffer misery looms large as a threat to divine justice. But this does not seem to be the only way in which divine justice can be threatened. And another threat in this issue concerning divine justice is one that concerns the communication of grace to human beings and whether any type of distribution of grace is consistent with divine justice. Can God be just if all humans are corrupt and all require grace for salvation, but only a select few in fact receive such grace? On this issue, it seems as though Malebranche has a clear response, namely that, quote, God establishes the order of grace solely through general volitions, the first of which is that all human beings be saved, end quote. And in this sense, Malebranche does seem to be concerned with issues pertaining to divine justice and the treatment of human individuals. Now, all this might suggest that a clearer demarcation is required to appropriately narrow down the Theodician project Jolley wishes to divest from Malebranche's purview. And if so, the point I'm making doesn't express a substantial disagreement with what I take to be Jolley's main claim and insight in the second thesis, which is focusing on the relation between divine justice and cases of those who are innocent or not. The third and last thesis, in my view, is the most interesting and will receive most of my attention. That, quote, Leibniz's concept of reflection seems to play a key role in his defense of the Augustinian principle, end quote, presupposes that Leibniz took the prospect of the misery of the innocent seriously, and Jolley brings out this point well throughout the paper. Jolley's emphasis on Leibniz's Neoplatonism with regard to the nature of human beings, I believe, can be further corroborated by paying attention to Leibniz's anti-Manichaean views with regard to our perfections that emerge in texts such as the Dialogue on Human Freedom and The Origin of Evil. Here we get the view that creaturely perfections all have their origin in divine perfections, and they are deficient not in the sense that they are tarnished by some distinct impurities being mixed in, as it were, but rather in the sense that there's not enough or as much. If the fall is not taken to imply that no human is innocent, then how does Leibniz attempt to stand by the Augustinian principle aforementioned? Jolley argues that Leibniz introduces a rather significant distinction between experiencing pain and experiencing, actually this should be misery or wretchedness, and restricts the scope of the Augustinian principle to that of experiencing misery or wretchedness. In doing so, Jolley argues that Leibniz can maintain the principle while consistently affirming instances of the innocent experiencing pain. That is, according to Jolley, Leibniz interprets the Augustinian principle to state that under a just God, no innocent creature ever suffers misery or is wretched, as distinct from merely feeling pain, which would allow for the experience of pain for some innocent. One question this narrow rereading of Augustine's principle raises is whose reading is more faithful to the original Augustinian intuition. Though this is not the place to engage in this pursuit fully, at first glance it seems as though the dialectical burden lies with Leibniz, insofar as there are some instances of pain that do not play an instrumental role in bringing about some further good. It seems problematic to profess allegiance to the spirit of the Augustinian principle and admit at the same time that innocent creatures experience pointless pain under a just God. If pain has no redeeming value, how could innocent animals or children being in pain be justified under a just God? As Jolley shows, Malebranche has an answer for both of these cases. On the one hand, animals do not experience pain, and on the other, children are not innocent. Would Leibniz respond by saying that all pain experienced by the innocent has some redeeming value and hence no pain is purely gratuitous? In contrast to his acceptance of pain in animals, Leibniz does not want to allow for misery or wretchedness in the innocent, and Jolley calls our attention to Leibniz's emphasis on the role of reflection as a necessary condition for wretchedness or misery. The main idea is grounded in a somewhat plausible phenomenological observation. Reflection, in the sense of a fully self-conscious subject having the capacity for self-mental attribution and navigating the space of reasons, as it were, by drawing appropriate inferences from such attributions. For example, I feel pain in my elbow, which suggests that I should not play tennis for a while. Such reflection is necessary for misery or wretchedness. The anticipation, dread, and avoidance of what we see as following from being in the state of pain, Jolley suggests, is what Leibniz saw as pivotal to our experience of misery or wretchedness. But if such reflection is necessary for the experience of misery, then Leibniz has a foothold in his attempt to exempt animals and small children from such misery. For Leibniz can argue, whether it's plausible or not, that animals and small children lack this capacity for reflection in the relevant sense. Jolley's third thesis, as we can see, is a claim about the central role the notion of reflection plays in Leibniz's narrow Theodician project. And I take it it's not a claim about whether this Leibnizian conception of reflection can play this role effectively or not, whether how successful this role is. Maybe he's more sympathetic to it than I'm reading him to be, but from the way I've read it, I don't think he intends to tackle this latter question issue in the paper today. And the thesis that he actually defends here then is rather difficult to contest given the text and how well it's been established. But in the spirit of promoting further discussion on this topic, let me allow to pursue the latter issue, that is whether this notion of reflection manages to do the job that it's invoked to do in the remaining space of the comments. So in order to consider this question, we need to consider how Leibniz deals with the cases of innocent adults in more detail. Why? Because it's these cases that emerge as the hardest cases for Leibniz. For while children and animals lack the necessary condition for misery, that innocent adults suffer misery seems inconsistent with the even weaker modified version of the Augustinian principle that Leibniz upheld, since innocent adults seem to possess this faculty of reflection. Jolley takes us through Leibniz's likely response by calling our attention to the fact that, quote, it is characteristic of the faculty of reflection that it can be redirected from one object to another. It is the mark of the virtuous person that he redirects his attention away from the pain or suffering to something else that is in him, end quote. Jolley then notes that, quote, drawing on anthropological